David Albury was 34 years old when he noticed his wife had started smiling differently. It wasn't the smile she gave him over breakfast. It wasn't the smile from their wedding photos 9 years ago. It wasn't even the polite smile she offered to neighbors and co-workers. This was something else entirely, something secret, something that seemed to glow from somewhere deep inside her, like she was holding on to a happiness that had nothing to do with him. And that realization, as small as it seemed, would eventually lead David to uncover a secret his wife had been hiding for 2 years. A secret involving $127,000 of their savings. A secret that would bring him to tears, not from betrayal, but from something far more unexpected. But before David could discover any of that, he had to do something he never imagined himself capable of. He had to follow his wife. It was a Thursday morning in late September 2024. David stood at their bedroom window in their modest 3-bedroom colonial in Westbrook, Connecticut, a house they'd purchased 7 years ago for $342,000 and had since paid down to owing just $187,000 on the mortgage. Through the glass, he watched Jessica walk toward her silver Toyota Camry, the same car she'd driven for 5 years, the same route she took every morning to her job as a registered nurse at St. Michael's Medical Center. At least, that's where David thought she went. Jessica paused at the driver's side door. She took a deep breath, and then it appeared. That smile, the one that had been haunting David's thoughts for the past 8 months. The one that seemed to hold secrets he wasn't part of. The one that made his stomach twist with a feeling he couldn't quite name. She got in the car and drove away. David watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner of Maple Street. His hands were trembling. "What is she so happy about?" he whispered to the empty room. "And why can't she share it with me?" David had been asking himself these questions for months. At first, he'd dismissed the smile as nothing. People smiled. His wife was allowed to be happy. But as the weeks turned into months, and the smile appeared every single morning without fail, David couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his marriage. Something he wasn't a part of. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We post new stories every single day, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers all around the world. David and Jessica had met 11 years ago at a hospital fundraiser in Hartford. David was 23, fresh out of college with an accounting degree from UConn, working his first real job at a small firm called Patterson Financial Services for $42,000 a year. Jessica was 22 in her final year of nursing school, volunteering at the event to fulfill her community service requirements. She'd been wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. David had spilled punch on his shirt, trying to work up the courage to talk to her. When he finally did, she'd laughed at his nervousness and offered him a napkin. "I'm David," he'd managed to say. "I know," she'd replied, pointing at his name tag. "I can read." They'd been together ever since. Their wedding had been small but beautiful. 87 guests at a converted barn in the Connecticut countryside, total cost of $34,000 that they'd saved for together over 2 years. Jessica's father, a retired postal worker named Frank, had walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. David's mother, Patricia, a high school English teacher, had given a toast about finding the person who makes you want to be better. For the first 7 years of marriage, David had believed he'd found exactly that person. Jessica was kind, driven, compassionate. She worked long shifts at St. Michael's, often coming home exhausted, but still asking about David's day. She remembered the small things, his favorite meals, the anniversaries of important moments, the names of his co-workers and their children. She was the kind of wife who left notes in his lunch bag and surprised him with weekend getaways when he was stressed. David, for his part, had built a stable career. He'd moved from Patterson Financial to Morrison & Webb, a larger accounting firm in downtown Hartford, where his salary had grown to $94,000 annually. He'd been promoted twice, managed a small team, and earned a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. He wasn't flashy or ambitious in the way some of his colleagues were, but he was reliable, steady, the kind of man who came home at the same time every night and never gave his wife a reason to worry. Maybe that was the problem, David sometimes thought. Maybe reliable and steady had become boring. Jessica's salary as a registered nurse was $72,000 per year, plus occasional overtime that could add another $8,000 to $12,000, depending on how many extra shifts she picked up. Together, they earned around $175,000 annually, which was comfortable for their area. Not wealthy, but secure. They had $143,000 in savings, $89,000 in retirement accounts, and no debt besides the mortgage. They'd talked about having children for years, but kept pushing it off. First, they wanted to be financially stable. Then Jessica wanted to advance in her career. Then David was up for a promotion that required extra hours. There was always a reason to wait. Now, at 34 and 33, they'd started trying 6 months ago. So far, nothing had happened. Jessica said it was normal, that it could take time, that they shouldn't stress about it. But David noticed she'd stopped bringing it up. She'd stopped tracking her cycle on the calendar. She'd stopped suggesting they try on specific nights. It was like she'd given up without telling him. Or maybe, David thought in his darker moments, she'd found something else to focus on, someone else. The changes had started 2 years ago, though David hadn't connected them until recently. It began in October 2022 when Jessica announced she was switching to a different unit at the hospital. "I'm moving to pediatric oncology," she'd said over dinner one evening. "The hours are a bit different, but the work is more meaningful to me." David had been supportive. "That sounds great, Jess. I know how much you care about working with kids." "It's going to be hard," Jessica had admitted. "These children are really sick. Some of them don't make it, but I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be." Over the following months, David noticed subtle shifts in his wife. She started waking up earlier, leaving the house by 6:15 a.m. instead of her usual 6:45. She bought new scrubs, nicer ones, and started wearing light makeup to work, something she'd never bothered with before. She hummed while getting ready, little melodies that seemed to spring from some internal joy, and then there was the smile. The first time David noticed it was on a Monday morning in January 2023. He'd been drinking coffee in the kitchen when Jessica walked past, heading for the door. She'd paused, her hand on the doorknob, taken a deep breath, and smiled. Not at David, not at anything visible, just smiled like she was savoring a secret. "What's that about?" David had asked. Jessica had startled, as if she'd forgotten he was there. "What's what about?" "That smile. You looked like you just remembered something wonderful." Jessica's expression had flickered, something passing behind her eyes too quickly for David to read. "Just excited about work, I guess. I love what I do." David had accepted that explanation for a while, but the smile kept appearing. Every morning, without fail. That same pause at the door, that same deep breath, that same secret expression of joy. And every time David asked about it, Jessica deflected. Just grateful for another day, thinking about a patient who's doing better. Remembering something funny from yesterday. The excuses varied, but the smile remained constant, and so did David's growing unease. 8 months ago, he'd finally voiced his fears to his best friend, Marcus Chen. They'd been at O'Malley's, a sports bar near David's office where they met every Thursday for wings and beer. Marcus was a sales manager at a tech company, divorced 3 years ago after discovering his wife had been having an affair with her personal trainer. The experience had made him suspicious of everything. "I'm probably being paranoid," David said, swirling his beer. "Jessica's never given me any reason to doubt her." "But," Marcus prompted, "but something's different. She's different. Happy in a way that doesn't include me." Marcus leaned forward. "Have you checked her phone?" "I'm not that guy. You might need to become that guy." "I trust my wife, Marcus." "I trusted my wife too, right up until I found texts from Mike from yoga that included phrases I won't repeat in polite company." David had laughed, but the conversation stayed with him. He didn't check Jessica's phone. He didn't follow her. He didn't hire a private investigator. He tried to trust, tried to believe, tried to convince himself that his wife's happiness was a good thing, even if he didn't understand it. But now, standing at the window, watching her drive away with that smile, David was done trying. Today, he was going to find out the truth. David called his office at 7:30 a.m. "Morrison and Webb, this is Sandra." "Sandra, it's David. I need to take a personal day. Something came up." "Is everything okay?" "Family matter. Nothing serious. I just need to handle something." "Of course. I'll let Mr. Morrison know." David hung up and grabbed his car keys. His hands were still shaking, but his resolve was firm. For better or worse, he was going to follow his wife and discover what was making her so happy. He got in his Honda Accord, a 2019 model he'd bought used for $22,000, and drove toward St. Michael's Medical Center. Jessica had a 20-minute head start, but David knew her route. She always took Route 9 to avoid the downtown traffic, then cut through the hospital district. Except today, Jessica didn't take Route 9. David spotted her silver Camry turning left onto Harbour Street, heading away from the hospital toward the waterfront district. His heart rate spiked. The waterfront was all restaurants, boutique hotels, and upscale office buildings. There was no reason for a nurse to go there. He followed at a distance, keeping 2 cars between them like he'd seen in movies. Jessica drove with purpose, no hesitation at intersections, no checking for directions. Wherever she was going, she'd been there many times before. After 10 minutes, Jessica pulled into the parking garage of a gleaming glass tower called Meridian Place. David noted the building's name with growing dread. He knew Meridian Place. Everyone in Hartford did. It was the headquarters of Meridian Health Foundation, one of the largest charitable organizations in New England. What was Jessica doing at a charity foundation? David parked across the street and watched the garage entrance. A few minutes later, he saw Jessica emerge from the elevator, walking toward the building's main entrance. She was still in her scrubs, but she moved differently than she did at home. Confident, purposeful, like she belonged here. A security guard at the door greeted her by name. "Good morning, Mrs. Albury." "Good morning, James. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Always is when you're here, ma'am." Jessica laughed and disappeared inside. David sat frozen in his car, his mind racing with possibilities. His wife, who supposedly worked as a nurse at St. Michael's, was apparently a regular at Meridian Place. So regular that the security guard knew her name and flirted with her. Was she having an affair with someone who worked here? Was Meridian Place some kind of cover for something else? Was anything Jessica had told him over the past 2 years actually true? David needed more information. He sat in his car for another 20 minutes, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe Jessica was consulting for them. Maybe she had a second job she hadn't mentioned. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation that would make him feel foolish for all this suspicion. But if it was innocent, why hadn't she told him? David pulled out his phone and searched for more information about Meridian Health Foundation. The organization had an impressive online presence. Their website showed photos of smiling children, grateful families, dedicated staff. Their annual reports listed expenditures of over $47 million last year, with overhead costs of only 8%, well below industry standards. The leadership page showed Richard Brennan as founder and chairman, along with a board of directors that included several prominent Hartford business leaders. The staff section listed about 40 employees across various departments. David scrolled through every name, every photo. Jessica wasn't listed. That didn't mean anything, he told himself. Websites weren't always updated. Staff changed frequently. But the absence of her name felt significant, like another piece of a puzzle he couldn't quite see. He got out of his car and approached the building's entrance, trying to look casual. The lobby was impressive, all marble floors and modern art, with a directory on the wall listing various foundations and charitable initiatives. "Can I help you, sir?" A young woman at the reception desk smiled professionally. "I'm just looking for information about the building." "What exactly is Meridian Health Foundation?" "We're a non-profit organization focused on healthcare access for underserved communities. We run free clinics, fund medical research, and coordinate care for patients who can't afford treatment. Is there something specific you're interested in?" "Do you know a woman named Jessica Albury?" The receptionist's smile flickered. "I'm sorry, I can't provide information about our staff or visitors. Is there something I can help you with specifically?" "Staff." The receptionist had said staff, not visitors. "No, thank you. I was just curious." David walked back to his car, his thoughts spinning. Jessica apparently worked here, at a charity foundation, doing something significant enough that she was known by name. But she'd told him she worked at St. Michael's. She left the house in nurses' scrubs every morning. She talked about patients and doctors and hospital politics. Had any of it been true? And that evening, David was home before Jessica, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, just holding. He'd spent the entire day researching Meridian Health Foundation and trying to understand what his wife could possibly be doing there. The foundation had been established 15 years ago by Richard Brennan, a tech entrepreneur who'd sold his company for $340 million and decided to dedicate his wealth to healthcare access. They ran 7 free clinics across Connecticut, funded research into childhood diseases, and had recently launched something called the Bright Futures Initiative that provided comprehensive medical care to children from low-income families. Nowhere in his research did David find any mention of Jessica. The front door opened at 6:22 p.m. Jessica walked in, still in her scrubs, looking tired but happy. that same underlying glow David had noticed for months. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" David looked at her. This woman he'd loved for 11 years, and wondered if he'd ever really known her at all. "Fine," he said. "How was yours?" "Exhausting but good. We had a tough case in the unit today, a 6-year-old with leukemia, but she's responding to treatment, so there's hope." The lie came so easily to her, so naturally. David felt something twist in his chest. "Jessica, I need to ask you something." "Of course." She sat down on the couch across from him, her expression open and trusting. "What's wrong? Where do you really work?" The color drained from Jessica's face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. For a long moment she said nothing. "What do you mean?" she finally managed. "I work at St. Michael's. You know that. I followed you today." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Jessica's hand flew to her chest, and David saw genuine shock in her eyes. "You followed me. I've been watching you leave every morning with that smile, that secret smile. For months, I've been wondering what makes you so happy. Today I decided to find out." "David, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I watched you walk into Meridian Place like you owned the building. The security guard knew your name. The receptionist called you staff. You want to explain how a nurse at St. Michael's has a second life at a charity foundation." Tears were forming in Jessica's eyes. "It's not what you think. What I think is that my wife has been lying to me for God knows how long. What I think is that our entire marriage might be built on secrets. What I think is that I don't know who you are anymore." "David, please, let me explain. It's not an affair. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred. I have never been unfaithful to you." "Then what is it?" Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and then she started talking. "It started 2 years ago," Jessica began, her voice trembling. "Do you remember when I switched to the pediatric oncology unit?" David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I told you it was because the work was more meaningful." "That was true. But something happened in my first week that changed everything." Jessica stood and walked to the window, her back to David. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her name was Emma Rodriguez. She was 7 years old. She had a brain tumor that was inoperable. Her parents had immigrated from Guatemala and worked 3 jobs between them just to make ends meet. They had no health insurance, no savings, nothing. Jessica's voice cracked. The hospital could treat Emma's symptoms, but the experimental therapy that might have saved her life cost $340,000. Her parents couldn't begin to afford it. They'd already sold everything they had. They were living in their car. "I remember you being upset around that time," David said quietly. "You said it was just work stress." "It was Emma. Every day I watched her get sicker. Every day I watched her parents' hope fade a little more. Her mother, Rosa, used to sit by Emma's bed and sing to her in Spanish, lullabies about stars and angels. She was preparing her daughter to die." Jessica turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I tried everything. I called charities, hospitals with research programs, drug companies that might provide compassionate use medication. I spent my lunch breaks and evenings researching options, making calls, writing emails. I must have contacted 200 organizations. What happened? Nothing. Nobody could help. The charities were overwhelmed. The research programs had strict eligibility criteria Emma didn't meet. The drug companies said they were sorry, but their hands were tied by regulations and liability concerns." Jessica sat back down, her hands clasped in her lap. "Emma died 3 weeks after I met her. She died holding her mother's hand while her father sobbed in the hallway, and there was nothing I could do, nothing anyone could do. Because in this country, a 7-year-old girl's life is worth less than the money her parents don't have." David felt his anger softening despite himself. "What happened after that?" "Emma died 3 weeks after I met her. She died holding her mother's hand while her father sobbed in the hallway. And there was nothing I could do, nothing anyone could do, because in this country, a 7-year-old girl's life is worth less than the money her parents don't have." Jessica turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That night I went home and I couldn't stop crying. You were asleep. You didn't know. I sat in the bathroom for 3 hours, just crying, thinking about Emma and her parents and all the other children who die because their families are poor." David remembered that night vaguely. He'd woken up and found Jessica's side of the bed empty. When she'd come back, she'd said she couldn't sleep and had been reading. Another lie, he now realized. "I decided I had to do something," Jessica continued. "Not just treat symptoms and watch children die. Something bigger, something that could actually change things." "So you went to Meridian Health Foundation?" "Not at first. First, I researched. For months, I read everything I could find about healthcare access, charitable foundations, funding mechanisms, policy initiatives. I spent every spare moment learning. I never noticed. I hid it from you. I'm not proud of that. But I was ashamed, David. Ashamed of wanting something so big. Ashamed of thinking I, a regular nurse, could make any difference. I thought if I told you, you'd think I was crazy. You'd talk me out of it. David felt the accusation in her words. You really thought I'd crush your dreams? I thought you'd be practical. You're always practical, David. You'd have asked about the risks, the chances of success, whether it was worth pursuing. And honestly, you would have been right to ask those questions. The odds of me accomplishing anything were tiny. But you did accomplish something. Jessica nodded slowly. In March 2023, I approached Richard Brennan with a proposal. I developed a comprehensive plan to expand healthcare access for children in underserved communities. Not just treatment, but prevention, education, family support, a whole ecosystem of care. And he just agreed to fund it? Not at first. He thought I was naive. He said he'd seen 100 proposals like mine, all of them failures, but I wouldn't give up. I came back week after week with more data, more research, more evidence. I showed him exactly how it could work and exactly what it would cost. Jessica sat back down closer to David now. Finally, he agreed to give me a chance. A small pilot program, $50,000 for 6 months, enough to help maybe 20 families. He said if I could prove the concept worked, he'd consider expanding it, and you proved it. We helped 47 families in that first 6 months. Not just helped, transformed their lives. Children who would have died are now in remission. Families who would have gone bankrupt are financially stable. The results were so strong that Richard doubled the budget for the next phase. David's mind was reeling. How big is the program now? Jessica looked at him with something like pride and fear mixed together. The Bright Futures Initiative has an annual budget of $4.7 million. We've helped over 800 families. We employ 23 people full-time. We've partnered with 6 hospitals, including St. Michael's, and we're expanding to 3 new states next year. David stared at her. You run a $4.7 million charitable program. I'm the executive director. I report directly to Richard Brennan and the foundation's board. But you still wear scrubs. You still talk about patients at the hospital. Because I still work at St. Michael's. 3 days a week, I'm there in the oncology unit, doing the same job I've always done. The other 2 days I'm at Meridian Place running Bright Futures. And evenings, weekends, whenever I can, I'm working on expansion plans, funding proposals, partnership agreements. David felt the ground shifting under his feet. The woman he'd thought was having an affair was actually running a major charitable initiative that saved children's lives. The secret smile wasn't about another man. It was about meaningful work that brought her joy. But she'd still lied to him for 2 years. Why didn't you tell me? David asked, his voice hoarse. Jessica was quiet for a long moment before answering. At first I didn't tell you because I didn't think anything would come of it. Why burden you with a dream that would probably fail? That's not your decision to make. I know that now. But then I was scared. And as time went on and the program actually started working, I got more scared, not less. Why? Because by then I'd been lying for months. How do I tell my husband that I've been deceiving him about where I go every day? How do I explain that the woman he thinks he knows has this whole other life he's not part of? David shook his head. You just tell me. You trust me enough to tell me. I wanted to, so many times. But there's something else, David, something I haven't told you yet. David braced himself. What else could there possibly be? Jessica took a deep breath. The program needed startup capital. Money that the foundation couldn't provide until I proved the concept worked. I had to fund the pilot program myself. A cold feeling spread through David's chest. How much? $127,000. David felt like he'd been punched. The number echoed in his mind, bouncing around like a ricocheting bullet. $127,000. Where did you get $127,000? Jessica couldn't meet his eyes. Our savings account. The money we'd been putting aside for a house upgrade, for our future children's education, for retirement. I transferred it in small amounts over 6 months so you wouldn't notice. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his back to Jessica, trying to process what he was hearing. You took $127,000 of our money without telling me. I borrowed it. Richard repaid me once the foundation took over full funding. Every penny is back in our account. You can check. That's not the point. David spun around, his voice louder than he'd intended. "The point is, you made a massive financial decision without me. You could have lost everything. We could have lost everything. I know. What if the pilot had failed? What if Richard had said no to expansion? We'd be $127,000 poorer, and you never would have told me why. I would have told you eventually. I was going to tell you. When? When the money was gone. When we couldn't afford our mortgage. When our life was in ruins." David's hands were shaking. He gripped the windowsill to steady himself. "Do you have any idea what I've been going through these past months? I thought you were having an affair. I was preparing myself to lose you. I imagined you with another man, laughing at how oblivious I was. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. I was falling apart. David, I'm so sorry. And the whole time you were just, running a charity, saving children, being a hero while I tortured myself with jealousy. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to fix something that was broken. Our marriage is what's broken now." The words hung in the air between them. Jessica flinched as if she'd been slapped. David took a breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm sorry. That was harsh. It was true. Maybe. But being true doesn't make it less harsh." Jessica stood and faced him, her own voice rising. "I knew it would work, David. I knew because I'd done the research, because I'd planned everything meticulously, because I wasn't willing to fail. Yes, I took a risk, a huge risk, but I took it because there were children dying and I had the chance to save them. You took it without me. That's what I can't get past. We're supposed to be partners, Jessica. Partners don't hide $127,000 decisions from each other. Partners don't maintain secret identities for 2 years. You're right." Jessica's voice softened. "You're absolutely right. I should have told you from the beginning. I should have trusted you to support me, or at least trusted you enough to share my dreams even if you had doubts. I failed you as a wife. I know that." The anger drained out of David, leaving only exhaustion. He sat back down heavily. "All those mornings," he said quietly. "That smile. I thought you were thinking about another man. I thought you couldn't wait to leave me and go to him. I was so sure you were having an affair that I made myself sick with it. I'm so sorry. But you were smiling because you were going to save children's lives. You were happy because you'd found your purpose, something that meant more than anything else." Jessica knelt in front of him, taking his hands. "Not more than you. Never more than you. The smile wasn't about leaving you. It was about gratitude. Every morning, I couldn't believe I got to do this work. I couldn't believe someone like me could make this kind of difference. I was smiling because I was grateful, because I felt useful, because I was doing something that mattered, and you couldn't share that with me. I was wrong not to. I see that now. I was so afraid of failing, so afraid of being judged, that I pushed away the one person who should have been beside me through all of it." David looked at his wife, this woman he'd loved for 11 years, and tried to reconcile everything he was feeling: anger at the deception, hurt at being excluded, pride in what she'd accomplished, love that hadn't disappeared, despite everything. "I need time," he said finally, "to process all of this. I understand. I'm going to Marcus's place for a few days. I need to think." Jessica nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks again. "Okay, I understand. Just please, David, please don't give up on us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I never stopped loving you. Everything I did wrong, but I did it trying to be someone worth loving." David stood and grabbed his car keys. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "you were always worth loving. You didn't need to save 800 children to prove that. You just needed to be honest with me." He walked out into the evening air, leaving Jessica crying in their living room. Marcus's apartment was small but comfortable, a one-bedroom in downtown Hartford that he'd moved into after his divorce. David had spent many evenings here over the past 3 years, listening to his friend process his own marriage's failure. Now, it was David's turn. "So, let me get this straight," Marcus said, handing David a beer. "How you thought your wife was cheating, but actually she's been secretly running a multi-million-dollar charity that saves dying children. That's the summary." "Yes." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's not what I expected." "Me neither." "And she took $127,000 from your savings without telling you. She paid it back, but she lied about where she works every day for 2 years." "Right. And she kept this entire double life completely hidden from you." "Correct." Marcus sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Man, I don't even know what to say. When you told me you thought Jessica was having an affair, I figured you'd either be wrong or you'd be right. I didn't anticipate a third option where she's secretly Mother Teresa. It's not funny. I'm not laughing. I'm genuinely confused about how to feel on your behalf. David drank half his beer in one long pull. Join the club. Okay, let's break this down, Marcus said, leaning forward. The facts are your wife lied to you for 2 years about something massive. She took a huge amount of money from your joint savings without permission. She made major life decisions without consulting you. Those are real problems. I know. But also, she did all of that to build a charity that saves children's lives. She wasn't cheating on you. She wasn't gambling. She wasn't secretly a drug addict. She was being a goddamn hero. I know that too. Marcus sat down across from David. How do you feel? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is furious. She lied to me for 2 years. She made massive decisions about our money without consulting me. She let me think I was going crazy with jealousy while she had this whole secret life. But another part of me is proud of her. What she's done is incredible. She saw children dying because their families were poor, and instead of just accepting it, she built a whole organization to fix it. That takes courage, vision, determination. Both things can be true, Marcus said. She can be an amazing person who did amazing things, and she can also have betrayed your trust in a significant way. David drank his beer in silence. What are you going to do? Marcus asked eventually. I don't know. If this were a normal affair, the answer would be clearer. Either try to work through it or end the marriage. But this isn't an affair. She wasn't sleeping with another man. She was saving children's lives. The lying is still lying, though. I know, but does the reason for the lying matter? Does it change how bad the lie is? Marcus considered this. I think context always matters. My ex-wife lied to me so she could sleep with her personal trainer. Your wife lied to you so she could build a charity. Those aren't equivalent lies. But they're both still betrayals of trust. True. Marcus leaned back. Here's what I think. You need to decide whether the marriage you had is worth fighting for. Not the marriage you thought you had, but the one that actually exists. A marriage where your wife is ambitious and driven and keeps secrets and does incredible things and makes unilateral decisions. Is that person someone you want to build a life with? David thought about it. He thought about Jessica's smile, the one that had tormented him for months. He'd assumed it was about passion for another person, but it was actually passion for meaningful work, passion for making a difference, passion for something bigger than herself. Was that so terrible? I need to see it, David said suddenly. The program, what she built. I need to understand it before I can decide anything. That makes sense. David pulled out his phone and typed a message to Jessica. Tomorrow 9 a.m., show me everything. The response came almost immediately. I will, thank you for giving me the chance. The next morning, David met Jessica at Meridian Place. She was waiting in the lobby, looking like she hadn't slept, dark circles under her eyes, and worry etched into every line of her face. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Just show me. They took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the Bright Futures Initiative had its offices. The space was open and modern, with motivational posters on the walls and the sound of phone calls and keyboard clicks filling the air. This is where we coordinate everything, Jessica explained, walking him through the space. We have case managers who work directly with families, researchers who track outcomes, fundraisers who identify new donors, and administrators who keep everything running smoothly. People greeted Jessica warmly as she passed, calling her by name, asking her questions, showing her reports. It was clear she was respected here, maybe even loved. David watched his wife interact with her colleagues and felt like he was seeing her for the first time. This was a side of Jessica he'd never witnessed. At home she was warm but reserved, content to let him take the lead in social situations. Here she was commanding, confident. People deferred to her, sought her approval, lit up when she gave them praise. Mrs. Albury, the Robinson case just got approved by the hospital board. Excellent. Make sure to follow up with the family about their housing situation. The father mentioned they were struggling with rent. Mrs. Albury, I finished the quarterly impact report. Do you have time to review it today? Send it to my email. I'll have notes back to you by tomorrow morning. Mrs. Albury, there's a call from the governor's office. They want to discuss the policy proposal. I'll take it in my office in 10 minutes. The governor's office. David's wife was fielding calls from the governor's office. A young woman approached them. Mrs. Albury, the Martinez family is here for their check-in. Thank you, Lisa. Can you put them in conference room B? I'll be there in 15 minutes. Lisa nodded and hurried off. Jessica turned to David. Do you want to meet them? The Martinez family? They're one of our success stories. David nodded. In conference room B, A Hispanic couple sat with a young girl who looked about 8 years old. The girl was bald, clearly undergoing chemotherapy, but she was smiling and coloring in a book while her parents talked quietly. "Maria, Carlos, this is my husband David," Jessica introduced him. "He's visiting today to learn about our program." The couple stood and shook David's hand warmly. Maria had tears in her eyes. "Your wife saved our daughter's life," she said in accented English. "Without bright futures, our Isabella would be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Carlos put his arm around his wife. "We had nothing. No insurance, no savings. The hospital said Isabella needed treatment that cost more than we could earn in 10 years. We thought we would have to watch our daughter die. Then Mrs. Albury found us," Maria continued. "She arranged everything. The treatment, the doctors, even help with our rent and food while Carlos couldn't work. She treated us like family." Isabella looked up from her coloring book. "Mrs. Jessica is my angel," she announced matter-of-factly. "She told me I'm going to grow up to be a doctor and help other kids like me." David looked at his wife, who was kneeling down to admire Isabella's coloring. The little girl threw her arms around Jessica's neck, and Jessica hugged her back with genuine love. "Your tumor markers are looking great," Jessica told Isabella. "Dr. Patterson says you're responding even better than expected." "Does that mean I get to keep my hair when it grows back?" "It means you get to keep everything. You're going to be just fine, sweetheart." After the Martinez family left, Jessica showed David more of the operation. He met case managers who worked with families to navigate complex medical systems. He saw the database tracking outcomes for every child they'd helped. He read thank you letters from parents who'd thought their situations were hopeless. One letter stopped him cold. "Dear Mrs. Albury, 2 years ago, you found us when our son was dying and we had nothing. You didn't just save his life. You saved our marriage, our family, our hope. Last week, Tommy started kindergarten. He ran into the classroom without looking back, excited to meet new friends. My wife and I stood in the parking lot and cried, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because of you, we get to watch our son grow up. We get to see his first day of school, his first lost tooth, his first everything. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. The Thompson family." David set down the letter, his vision blurry. "How many?" he asked hoarsely. "How many families have you helped?" 847 families, 9 TWO children, 94% success rate in securing necessary treatment. 89% of families report improved financial stability after working with us. And the children who didn't make it?" Jessica's expression tightened with pain. 67. We couldn't save everyone. Some cases were too advanced by the time they reached us. Some diseases don't have cures yet, no matter how much money you throw at them. Every one of those losses broke my heart. But you kept going, because the ones we could save needed us to keep going. David looked around the office, at the photos of smiling children on the walls, at the dedicated staff working at their desks, at this incredible operation his wife had built from nothing. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "I thought I knew you, Jessica, but I had no idea you were capable of this. I wasn't sure I was capable either. I think that's why I couldn't tell you. If I failed, I could pretend it never happened. No one would know I'd reached for something this big and fallen short." "But you didn't fall short." "No." Jessica allowed herself a small smile. "I didn't. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because the ending of this story will change how you think about everything. Drop a comment below telling us what you think David should do. Should he forgive Jessica? Let us know your opinion." That evening, David and Jessica sat on a bench in the small park near Meridian Place. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. "I understand now," David said, the smile. "Every morning you weren't thinking about someone else. You were thinking about all those children, about the difference you were making." "I was thinking about how lucky I am," Jessica said, "to have found my purpose, to be able to help. Every morning I remind myself that this is real, that I actually get to do this work. It's incredible work, Jess. I mean that. But," David sighed, "but you still lied to me. For 2 years about something this big. You took a massive amount of money from our savings without asking. You built an entire life I wasn't part of. I know. I'm not asking you to pretend that didn't happen." "Good, because I can't pretend. It happened. You chose to exclude me from the biggest thing that's ever happened in your life." Jessica nodded, accepting the criticism. "Here's what I keep coming back to," David continued. "You said you didn't tell me because you were afraid I'd talk you out of it, that I'd be too practical, too focused on risks. Do you really think so little of me?" "No, I think that little of myself. I was afraid that if anyone questioned my dream, I'd lose the courage to pursue it. You were the person whose opinion mattered most, which made you the person I was most afraid to tell. That's backwards. I know it's backwards. I know it doesn't make sense. But fear isn't rational. I was terrified, David. Terrified of failing those children. Terrified of looking foolish. Terrified of disappointing you. You disappointed me by not trusting me. I know. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset. I've been thinking, David said eventually, about what Marcus said. What did he say? He asked if the marriage we actually have, not the one I thought we had, is worth fighting for. A marriage where you're ambitious and keep secrets and make unilateral decisions and do incredible things. And what did you decide? David turned to face her. I decided I need to know something first. If I forgive you, if we try to rebuild our marriage, will you let me in? Not just into your home and your bed, but into your work, your dreams, your fears. All of it. No more secret lives. No more hidden identities. Yes. Absolutely yes. I want to be part of Bright Futures. Not just as your husband, but as a real contributor. I'm an accountant. I know financial management. Maybe I can help make sure the organization is sustainable for the long term. Jessica's eyes widened. You'd do that? I'd quit my job at Morrison & Webb, take a salary cut, probably a significant one, work for your charity instead. David, you don't have to prove anything to me. I'm not proving anything to you. I'm proving something to myself. I spent 2 years on the sidelines of your life while you were saving children. I don't want to be on the sidelines anymore. I want to be in the game with you. Jessica took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Are you sure? This work is hard. The hours are long. The stakes are high. You'll see things that break your heart. I've already seen things that break my heart. My wife crying in the bathroom at 3 a.m. because a 7-year-old died. My marriage nearly falling apart because of secrets and miscommunication. I've had plenty of heartbreak. At least this way the heartbreak would mean something. Jessica leaned her head on his shoulder. I don't deserve you. Maybe not. But you're stuck with me anyway. Is that a yes? You're forgiving me? It's a conditional yes. We're going to couples counseling. We're going to learn how to communicate better. And you're never, ever keeping secrets from me again about anything. Even if you're scared. Especially if you're scared. I promise no more secrets ever. And I want to understand everything about Bright Futures. Not just the success stories, but the challenges, the failures, the parts that keep you up at night. If we're going to be partners, I need to be a real partner, not someone you protect from the hard stuff. I can do that. One more thing, David said, his tone softening. I need you to understand why this hurt so much. It wasn't just the lying about where you work. It was feeling like I didn't matter enough to be included, like you didn't trust me, like our marriage was less important than keeping your secret. Jessica's eyes filled with fresh tears. I never felt that way. You matter more than anything. That's exactly why I was afraid to tell you. But I'm your husband. I'm supposed to be the one person in the world you can tell anything to. If you can't trust me with your dreams, what's the point of being married? You're right. I know you're right. I grew up in a house where my father's dreams were always dismissed. My mother would tell him to be realistic, to stop reaching for things that were impossible. I watched him slowly give up on everything he wanted because the person closest to him didn't believe in him. David hadn't known this about Jessica's family. Her father, Frank, was a quiet man who worked at the post office for 30 years and never complained about anything. David had always assumed he was content with his life. I didn't want to become my mother, Jessica continued, but more than that, I didn't want you to become my father. I didn't want my dreams to be the thing that created tension between us, so I kept them separate. I see now how wrong that was. David took his wife's hands in his. I am not going to dismiss your dreams, Jessica. I might ask hard questions. I might point out risks, but that's not the same as telling you to give up. I want to be the person who helps you achieve impossible things, not the person who talks you out of trying. Then yes, David said, I forgive you. Let's rebuild this marriage and save some children while we're at it. Some of my farm says. 6 months later, David walked into Meridian Place as the newly hired Chief Financial Officer of the Bright Futures Initiative. His salary was $67,000 a year, nearly $30,000 less than he'd made at Morrison & Webb. Jessica had offered to match his old salary from the foundation's budget, but David had refused. He wanted the organization's money going to children, not to his ego. The pay cut had required adjustments. They'd cancelled their country club membership, which had cost $4,800 a year and gone unused most months anyway. They'd traded their annual Caribbean vacation for a camping trip to Acadia National Park. They'd started cooking at home more, which turned out to be one of the best changes they'd made. Some of their most important conversations now happened while chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. Jessica had worried that David would resent the lifestyle downgrade, but the opposite was true. He felt lighter without the expensive trappings of his old life. The country club had been a networking obligation, not a pleasure. The Caribbean vacations had been more about posting photos than actually relaxing. The fancy restaurant dinners had been celebrations of money rather than connection. Now, every dollar they didn't spend on themselves was a dollar that could help a child. That math made the sacrifices feel like gifts rather than losses. The decision to leave his accounting job had been surprisingly easy once he'd made it. For 15 years he'd been good at his work, but never passionate about it. He'd crunched numbers, balanced spreadsheets, helped wealthy corporations save money on their taxes. It was respectable work. It paid well. It meant absolutely nothing. When David had told his boss, Mr. Morrison, that he was leaving, the older man had looked at him with genuine confusion. "You're leaving a $94,000 position to work at a non-profit. For less money?" "Yes, sir." "May I ask why?" David had thought about how to explain it. "How do you tell someone that your wife's secret life had shown you everything that was missing from your own?" "Because I want my work to matter," David had finally said. "I want to go home at night, knowing that the numbers I worked on that day made a difference in someone's life." Mr. Morrison had been silent for a long moment. Then he'd stood, walked around his desk, and shaken David's hand. "I've worked here for 35 years, he said. "Sometimes I wonder if any of it mattered at all. Good luck, David. I think you're making the right choice." Richard Brennan met him in the lobby on his first day. The tech billionaire was smaller in person than David had expected, a wiry man in his 60s with keen eyes and an easy smile. "Mr. Albury, welcome to the team." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Brennan." "Richard, please. Your wife has told me a lot about you. She says you're the most honest person she's ever known." David laughed. "She kept a secret life from me for 2 years. I'm not sure she's the best judge of honesty." Richard's eyes twinkled. "She also told me about that. For what it's worth, I advised her to tell you from the beginning. She was too afraid to listen. She's not afraid anymore." "No, she's not. And that's thanks to you." Richard led him upstairs to the Bright Futures offices, where Jessica was waiting with the rest of the team. There was applause when David walked in, the genuine enthusiasm of people who had heard about him for months and were happy to finally meet him. Jessica hugged him in front of everyone. "Welcome to Bright Futures, Mr. CFO. Happy to be here, Mrs. Executive Director." Over the following weeks, David immersed himself in the organization's finances. He found inefficiencies that could be streamlined, funding opportunities that hadn't been explored, partnerships that could be leveraged. His accountant's mind, so focused on routine spreadsheets for years, came alive when applied to something that actually mattered. In his first month, David identified $340,000 in potential savings by renegotiating contracts with medical equipment suppliers. The money was immediately redirected to fund treatment for an additional 47 children. In his second month, he developed a new donor tracking system that increased recurring donations by 23%. He also established a reserve fund that would allow the organization to continue operating for 18 months, even if all outside funding suddenly stopped. By his third month, David was presenting financial strategies to Richard Brennan and the board of directors. His proposals for sustainable growth impressed everyone, including his wife, who had known he was good with numbers, but hadn't realized how brilliant he could be when those numbers represented something he cared about. "You've transformed our financial operations," Richard told him after one particularly successful board meeting. "We were running on passion and hope. Now we're running on passion, hope, and a solid financial foundation." "The passion and hope are still the important parts," David replied. "I just make sure we can afford to keep having them." He also got to know the families they served. Unlike his old job, where numbers on spreadsheets never connected to real people, at Bright Futures every dollar had a face. Every budget decision affected children who were counting on them. There was the Thompson family, whose son had beaten leukemia thanks to a treatment the program funded. David had the boy's thank you card pinned to his office wall. There was the Chen family, immigrants from Taiwan, whose daughter needed heart surgery. David had personally reviewed their case to ensure every possible resource was being used efficiently. There was the Williams family, a single mother with 3 children, one of whom had been diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. David had found a research grant that covered experimental treatment no insurance would pay for. Each family reminded him why he'd left his comfortable accounting job. Each success story validated his decision. Each child's smile made the 30% pay cut feel like the best investment he'd ever made. Isabella Martinez came by the office once a month for check-ins. Her hair had started growing back, a soft fuzz of dark brown that she proudly showed off to anyone who would look. She'd adopted David as another honorary uncle, insisting on showing him her latest drawings and telling him about her plans to become a doctor. "When I grow up," she told him one afternoon, "I'm going to work here too. I'm going to help kids like Mrs. Jessica helped me." David looked at this little girl who should have died 2 years ago and felt something he'd never experienced in his old career. Purpose, meaning, the knowledge that his work mattered. "You're going to be a great doctor, Isabella." "I know," she said with absolute confidence. "Mrs. Jessica told me so." 1 year after David discovered his wife's secret, Bright Futures held its annual gala at the Hartford Convention Center. Over 600 guests attended, including donors, medical professionals, government officials, and families who had been helped by the program. The venue had been transformed into an elegant space, with round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of fresh flowers, and screens showing photos and videos of the children whose lives had been changed. A silent auction in the corner featured donated items ranging from vacation packages to signed sports memorabilia, all proceeds going to expand the program's reach. David had coordinated the financial side of the event, ensuring that for every dollar spent on the gala, at least $3 would be raised for the children. It was a ratio he was proud of, one that proved you could have an elegant fundraiser without wasting the money donors were trying to give. Jessica stood at the podium, radiant in a blue gown that matched her eyes. David sat in the front row, his heart swelling with pride. Next to him were the Martinez family, Isabella now healthy and full of energy, wearing a pink dress her mother had saved for 3 months to buy. 3 years ago, Jessica began, I watched a 7-year-old girl die because her family couldn't afford treatment. Her name was Emma Rodriguez and she changed my life. The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words. On the screens around the venue, a photo appeared of a young Latina girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Emma, frozen forever at age 7. Emma made me realize that talent and potential mean nothing in a system that values wealth over wellness. She made me see that children were dying preventable deaths every day while we looked away, and she made me understand that I had a choice. I could accept the world as it was, or I could try to change it. Jessica's voice strengthened. In the past 3 years, Bright Futures has served over 2,000 families. We've helped children get treatments they never could have afforded. We've prevented families from choosing between their child's health and their financial survival. We've proven that healthcare access isn't an impossible dream. It's a solvable problem. Applause rippled through the audience. Isabella clapped so hard her hands turned red. But I didn't do this alone. I had the support of Richard Brennan and the Meridian Foundation, whose generosity and vision made everything possible. Richard, seated at a table near the front, nodded graciously. I had an incredible team of dedicated professionals who believed in our mission. Jessica gestured to the Bright Futures staff members scattered throughout the room. Every person who works for this organization has turned down higher-paying jobs to be here. That's not martyrdom. That's the privilege of meaningful work. And I had my husband, David. She turned to look at him, her eyes glistening. A year ago, David discovered that I'd been keeping secrets from him. Big secrets. Our marriage nearly fell apart because I was too afraid to trust him with my dreams. But instead of giving up on us, David chose to understand. He chose to forgive. And then he chose to join me in this work. David felt tears forming in his own eyes. David taught me something important. He taught me that partnership isn't about hiding your fears. It's about sharing them. It's about being brave enough to let someone see you at your most vulnerable. It's about trusting that the person who loves you wants to see you succeed, not fail. Jessica raised her glass. To everyone who has supported Bright Futures, to the families who trusted us with their children's lives, to the team who works tirelessly every day, and to my husband, who showed me that the greatest risk isn't failure, it's never letting the people who love you in. The room stood and applauded. David rose and made his way to the stage, pulling Jessica into an embrace while cameras flashed around them. I love you, he whispered in her ear. I love you too. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being worth fighting for. After the gala, David and Jessica stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, looking out over the Hartford skyline. The city sparkled with lights, and somewhere out there, children who might have died were sleeping safely in their beds because of the organization they'd built together. "Do you remember that smile?" David asked. "The one that used to drive me crazy? How could I forget? You followed me because of that smile. I thought you were thinking about another man. I thought I'd lost you to someone else. And now?" David turned to face her. "Now I understand. You were smiling because you'd found your purpose, because you were doing something meaningful, because you were making a difference in the world. The smile is different now, though," Jessica said. "How so?" "Before, I was smiling alone, carrying my dreams by myself, keeping everyone else out. Now I smile because I have a partner, someone to share the victories and the defeats, someone who understands why this work matters." She took his hand. "The smile isn't lonely anymore." David pulled her close. "No more secrets?" "No more secrets. From now on we share everything, the good days and the bad days, the successes and the failures. All of it. That's all I ever wanted." They stood together, watching the city lights flicker below. Two people who had almost lost each other, but found something stronger instead. A marriage built not just on love, but on shared purpose. A partnership that made both of them better than they could have been alone. "You know what I realized?" David said after a long silence. "What? That smile that used to scare me? I have it now too. Every morning when I wake up and think about the work we're doing, the children we're helping, I can't help smiling." Jessica laughed. "I've noticed, I just didn't want to say anything. Are you going to start following me to work?" "I don't need to. I already know where you're going." "And where's that?" "The same place I'm going. Somewhere that matters." At Senior, 3 years later, David and Jessica stood in the lobby of Meridian Place, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers. The occasion was the official announcement of Bright Future's nationwide expansion. What had started as a small pilot program in Hartford was now operating in 23 states, with plans to reach all 50 by the end of the decade. They had helped over 15,000 families. They had partnered with more than 200 hospitals. They had influenced policy at the state and federal level. They had proven that systemic change was possible. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, budget shortfalls, political opposition. Some states had welcomed the program enthusiastically. Others had resisted, suspicious of outside organizations trying to change their healthcare systems. David had spent countless hours in meetings with skeptical legislators, explaining the financial models, showing the outcome data, making the case that investing in children's health wasn't just morally right, but economically smart. Jessica had faced her own challenges. As the program grew, so did the scrutiny. Critics accused her of being naive, of undermining the healthcare industry, of not understanding the complexity of medical economics. She'd been attacked in op-eds, challenged in hearings, and second-guessed by people who had never spent a single day watching a child die for lack of affordable care. But for every critic, there were 100 supporters. Families who had been helped, doctors who had seen the difference the program made, donors who wanted to be part of something meaningful, politicians who recognized that helping sick children was good politics as well as good policy. The expansion had required massive organizational growth. What started as a team of 23 was now over 300 employees across the country. David had built financial systems that could scale, training regional directors, establishing consistent standards, creating a culture where every dollar was treated as sacred because it represented a child's chance at life. Richard Brennan stood at the podium. When Jessica Albury first walked into my office with her proposal, I thought she was naive. A nurse with a dream and no real plan. I've never been happier to be wrong. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jessica's vision has transformed healthcare access for vulnerable children across this country, and her husband David's financial expertise has made that vision sustainable. Together they represent everything philanthropy should be, bold enough to dream big and practical enough to make those dreams real. Richard gestured to them. "Please welcome Jessica and David Albury." They walked to the podium together hand in hand. Jessica spoke first, her voice clear and confident. 7 years ago, I watched a little girl die and decided to do something about it. Today, children like Emma have a chance they never would have had before. That's not because of me, it's because of everyone in this room. The donors who believed in us, the medical professionals who partnered with us, the families who trusted us with their most precious gifts. She looked at David. And it's because of my husband, who taught me that the greatest dreams are the ones we share. David stepped forward. For years I was a good accountant at a good firm doing good work. But it wasn't until I discovered my wife's secret that I understood what my skills could really accomplish. Numbers aren't just numbers. Their children getting treatment, their families staying together, their lives being saved. He smiled, that smile he'd once found so mysterious on his wife's face. I used to think my wife was having an affair because she smiled every morning before leaving for work. I was convinced she was thinking about another man. I followed her, sure I would catch her in some devastating betrayal. The audience leaned in, curious about this unexpected turn. What I found instead was that my wife had been secretly building a charity that would help thousands of children. She wasn't cheating on me. She was changing the world. Laughter and applause filled the room. The point of this story isn't that I was wrong about the affair. The point is that I almost let suspicion destroy the best thing in my life. I almost threw away my marriage because I couldn't understand why my wife was happy. David's expression grew serious. If you're watching someone you love and wondering why they seem different, why they seem distant, why they seem to have joy that doesn't include you, don't assume the worst. Talk to them. Trust them. Give them the chance to share whatever they're carrying. And if you're the one keeping secrets, Jessica added, know that the people who love you want to be part of your dreams, not protected from them. The biggest mistake I ever made wasn't starting Bright Futures. It was not trusting my husband enough to tell him about it. She squeezed David's hand. Don't make the same mistake. Share your dreams with the people you love. Let them in. You might be surprised at what you can build together. The applause was thunderous. That evening, after all the interviews and celebrations were done, David and Jessica drove home to Westbrook. The same house they'd lived in for 10 years, the same neighborhood, the same life in most ways. But everything was different. They'd added a nursery 2 years ago when their daughter Emma was born, named after the little girl whose death had started everything. Emma Albury was now 18 months old, a bright-eyed toddler who had already visited dozens of hospitals and met hundreds of children who were being helped by her parents' organization. Jessica's mother was babysitting tonight. She greeted them at the door with sleeping Emma in her arms. How was the big announcement? Perfect, Jessica said, taking her daughter carefully. Everything went exactly as planned. I saw you on the news. Both of you looked wonderful. After Jessica's mother left, David and Jessica stood in Emma's nursery, watching their daughter sleep. The walls were decorated with artwork from children who had been helped by Bright Futures. Cards and letters filled a special album, evidence of all the lives that had been changed. We did this, Jessica whispered. Together. You started it, but you made it sustainable. You made it real. David put his arm around his wife. Do you remember when I followed you that day? When I was convinced you were having an affair? How could I forget? I was so sure I'd lost you, so certain that your happiness belonged to someone else. If I'd just confronted you then, demanded an explanation, we might have had this conversation 2 years earlier, or we might have had a fight and damaged our marriage beyond repair. You weren't ready to hear the truth back then. Neither was I. Everything happened the way it was supposed to. Everything happened the way it did. Maybe that's all we can say. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter dream. I still smile every morning, Jessica said eventually. I know, but now you smile at me, not just at the door. I smile at you because you're the best part of my mornings. The work matters. The children matter. But you matter most. David kissed the top of her head. No more secrets. No more secrets. From now until forever. They left Emma's nursery, turning off the light but leaving the door cracked open so they could hear if she woke. Down the hall in their bedroom, they got ready for sleep the way they had thousands of times before. But before they turned off the lights, Jessica paused. David? Yeah, thank you for following me that day, for being angry, for demanding answers, for not giving up on us, even when you had every right to. Thank you for having something worth discovering. If you'd actually been having an affair, this would have gone very differently. Jessica laughed. Probably. I love you, Jess. The real you. The one who keeps secrets and takes risks and believes she can change the world. That's the woman I married, even if I didn't know it at the time. I love you too. The real you. The one who follows his wife when he's worried, asks hard questions, and chooses forgiveness over anger. That's the man I want to grow old with. They fell asleep holding hands. Two people who had found their way back to each other through secrets and suspicions, and ultimately, through truth. The next morning, David woke before Jessica. He made coffee and stood at the bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. He heard Jessica stirring behind him. A moment later, She appeared at his side, still in her pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep. "Good morning," she said, kissing his cheek. "Good morning." They stood together, watching the new day begin. In the nursery down the hall, Emma started to babble, waking up to a world full of possibilities. Jessica turned to head toward the baby's room. At the doorway she paused. She took a deep breath and she smiled. But this time the smile was directed at David, open, warm, including him in whatever joy she was feeling. "What's that smile for?" David asked. "Everything," Jessica said. "Just everything." She went to get their daughter, and David followed, still smiling himself. That mysterious expression that had once driven him to jealousy and suspicion now filled him with warmth and gratitude. They'd learned that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, could nearly destroy a marriage. They'd learned that trust had to be earned, but also given. They'd learned that the greatest partnerships weren't built on perfect communication, but on the willingness to keep trying, to keep talking, to keep choosing each other, even when it was hard. Most importantly, they'd learned that sometimes the things we fear most, the secrets we think will devastate us, turn out to be the very things that can transform our lives for the better. David had spent months torturing himself with images of his wife in another man's arms. He'd imagined confrontations, divorce proceedings, custody battles they didn't even need to have since they had no children yet. He'd created entire catastrophic scenarios in his mind, each one more painful than the last. And all along, the truth had been so much simpler and so much more complicated than anything he'd imagined. His wife wasn't betraying him. She was becoming the best version of herself. She was growing in ways he hadn't been invited to witness. She was building something magnificent, while he remained stuck in his comfortable, meaningless routine. The real tragedy wouldn't have been Jessica having an affair. The real tragedy would have been David never finding out about bright futures, never having his eyes open to what was possible, never learning that his wife was capable of changing the world and that he could help her do it. Sometimes the worst-case scenario isn't what we think it is. Sometimes the worst-case scenario is the status quo, the comfortable life we've built, the dreams we've stopped pursuing. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a marriage is a crisis that forces both people to stop sleepwalking and start really seeing each other. David had thought his wife was having an affair. What he discovered instead was that she was changing the world, and she just needed him to help her do it. That discovery had made him cry, not from betrayal, but from awe, from pride, from the overwhelming realization that the woman he loved was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope to find in a partner. Someone who surprises us, someone who challenges us, someone who invites us to grow alongside them into better versions of ourselves. David had been a good husband before the crisis, faithful, reliable, supportive in all the expected ways. But he'd also been passive, content to let Jessica handle her own dreams while he focused on providing stability. He'd thought that was enough. He'd thought that was what marriage looked like. Now he understood that true partnership meant something more. It meant being actively engaged in each other's growth. It meant asking questions and offering help. It meant noticing when your spouse was struggling and stepping in, not stepping back. It meant treating their dreams as shared projects rather than separate pursuits. If David had been paying more attention, he might have noticed Jessica's transformation 2 years earlier. He might have seen the late nights, the hidden research, the gradual shift in her energy and focus. He might have asked the right questions at the right time and been invited into her dream from the beginning. But perhaps that wasn't how their story was supposed to go. Perhaps they needed the crisis, the near destruction, the painful confrontation to become the partners they were meant to be. Perhaps some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Jessica had found her purpose. David had found his. And together, they had found something neither could have built alone. A family, a mission, a love that had survived its greatest test and emerged stronger for it. The couple's counseling they'd gone through had been transformative. Dr. Sarah Kim, their therapist, had helped them see the patterns that led to Jessica's secrecy and David's suspicion. She'd taught them that trust wasn't just about not lying, it was about actively choosing to be vulnerable, to share fears and dreams, even when it felt dangerous. One session in particular had stuck with David. Dr. Kim had asked them each to describe their greatest fear about the relationship. David had said his fear was being left behind, not being interesting enough to keep Jessica's attention. Jessica had said her fear was disappointing David, being seen as foolish for dreaming too big. Reading each other's answers had been painful, but clarifying. They'd both been operating from fear, making decisions to protect themselves rather than strengthen their partnership. The secrets, the suspicion, the emotional distance, all of it stemmed from the same source, not trusting that their love was strong enough to survive the truth. Now, 3 years later, they trusted completely. Not because they were perfect, but because they'd proven they could survive imperfection. They'd been through the fire and come out stronger. They knew, with bone-deep certainty, that their marriage could handle anything. The smile Jessica wore every morning hadn't changed, but its meaning had transformed entirely. It was no longer a private joy that excluded David. It was a shared gratitude that included him in every part of her happiness. And David smiled too, every single morning, for exactly the same reasons. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Would you have forgiven Jessica? Would you have quit your job to join her charity? We want to hear your opinions, and if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We post new stories every single day, and each one is more incredible than the last. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.